so great, I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with the king on that, he'll just be great. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
I said, can I be a legend? Search your soul and answer me this question. Do you think I have what it takes to be great, but still be humble and learn from my mistakes?
Good night, everyone, and welcome back to your favorite sport show, none other than obviously This Just In. We have a tremendous show in store for you, not like we don't every week, but the greatest show on earth just completed, none other than the Tokyo Olympics. So for a huge show, we have to have a huge cast. Obviously, y'all know the regular host, Marsha Boyce, but we're going to swap in roles tonight. Hey, good night, Marsha. You look lovely in my role tonight, but we'll get there. Huge super fan and principal sponsor of the show, none other than Ricky Nurse. What's going on, Ricky?
I'm good. Good evening, everyone.
And a very, very special guest, a man who was on the spot in Tokyo himself, OIS reporter. And for those who don't know, that is Olympic Information Services reporter Anmar Goodridge-Boyce, sorry, a former colleague of mine. Anmar, how are you tonight?
Hi, good night, Justin. And first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure. I'm doing good. I'm great. A bit tired, but I'm doing pretty well.
I can imagine you're tired on that long, multiple flights back from Tokyo into the Caribbean. So obviously, as a man on the spot, you get a quick spotlight here. Give us a brief overview. What was it like covering Olympics, especially at the young and tender age of 22? What was that like?
Yeah, it was a great experience, Justin. A bit surreal for me. It was my first Olympics. I've done the Buenos Aires and Lausanne 2020 Youth Olympic Games. So it's a bit of a step up for me. And what I would say is it was a fantastic experience. I was able to rub shoulders with some of the best athletes in the world, some of the best journalists. It was the games of a bit of a difference, obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of protocols. But I would say it's definitely one that goes down in the books for me. If I had to say probably the best career moment since I've been a journalist, it will have to be this.
I would figure as much. I'm glad that you brought up, the tight protocols, because this was not your normal, typical Olympic Games. So I'm going to start with you, Ricky, because I know you were messaging me daily, especially when track and field was on. So considering the protests, considering the pandemic itself, considering the lack of spectators, Ricky, what was your overall thoughts of these Tokyo 2020 Games?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I deemed it the Audacity Olympics simply because it required audacity on the part of the organizers. It required audacity on the part of the athletes to get those kind of hurdles and obstacles last year and reset and somehow to be ready. It required, as we all know, athletes to go beyond what they normally would do in terms of their disciplines. In terms of, up to today, I saw a post that the great Usain Bolt did, where he was reminding the athletes that when they were looking for sponsorship from corporate, in this case, I'm presuming primarily corporate Jamaica, that they were not there for them. And he reminded them of that and told them that at this time, when some of these entities are now looking to assign their brand and their likeness to their corporations, remember your worth, remember your value. That's an audacious thing by Bolt to do. I need you guys to remember your value and remember what you went through at this particular moment in time. I'm not going to get into the audacity that we had on the local side with a king in the chess piece, but certainly for me, it was the Audacity Olympic because it required athletes to take stands and to do things in conditions that were anywhere from normal. Yeah. So to me, that's what it really was. And I think it reflected in the performances for some countries.
I agree with, yes, actually, I agree with Ricky in terms of a certain level of audacity required to pull off these games. All in all, for me, it was great execution. And there was that school of thought, if there was one country that could pull off a games in the middle of the pandemic, it would have been Japan, as one of the few countries, given the culture, given the heritage, given having had a games before, there are level of organization, etc. And from an athlete perspective, when you take into consideration, we had that year delay, there would have been disruption in their preparations, and the athletes then still brought their very best. And you saw it displayed after events and so forth. And then I didn't get the chance, like Anmar, to be there on the spot, but from a TV viewing experience, even though there weren't spectators in the stands, I don't think that impacted my viewing experience tremendously. If anything, it allowed me to hear what some of the athletes are saying while they were out there, particularly in the field events, which probably made some broadcast producers scramble a bit because some of the things were not necessarily, fit
Raw
for,
and
but you got
unfiltered.
that, yes, you got that raw and filtered sense of what athletes are feeling when they're out there in that discus circle or shot put circle and so forth. So for me, 10 out of 10.
Woo!
Wow.
So, Anmar,
Wow.
you were there. So, 10 out of 10 for you. What were your overall thoughts on the games, especially without spectators in light of a major pandemic?
I mean, it's interesting what Marsha said, and I definitely agree in terms of the culture. What I must say, though, is on arrival in Japan, I mean, these people are some of the most genuine, most helpful, and the most pleasant people I've ever interacted with, Justin. And in terms of organization, everything is just so set. So if they tell you, the bus to the stadium is leaving at 8 o'clock, trust and believe. If you get there at 8:05, you have to get the next bus there. So, I mean, simple things like that. There was a hand sanitizer station, so that just ensured the level of seriousness that these people were taking and putting into these games to ensure that COVID-19 protocols were on displayed. And I mean, if we look at the performances, we saw 1061 from Elaine Thompson-Herah. We saw Warmer 400-meter hurdles 45.9. I mean, the performances were outstanding. If we talk about the spectators, the seat. So you could only tell that there were no spectators in and around the stadium at points and times, when the stadium announcer was probably at break or something like that. But apart from that, there was a bit of atmosphere there because obviously athletes who were waiting to participate were there and coaches. So that probably the senior games would have. I think what was a bit missing is just obviously the fans and the culture from the different countries, the spectatorship. I don't think that was missing at all. And I thought, what was broadcast, because obviously being there and being on and then having the chance to look at what was being put out on television, say that it was at home, the viewers, got 100% what was taking place at these venues.
Well, spectators would have been missing, but guess what wasn't missing, guys? Controversy and particularly positive COVID-19 tests. So I know this is a hot topic for Marsha, so that's where I'm going to start this right now. Did you have any concerns with the organizers continuing the games, even though in light of I don't want to use spike because that's a bit much, but the rise of positive tests surrounding the games?
To be honest, once we established that cancellation was not on the table, cancellation was not an option, then the games had to go ahead and you had to find a way to make it work. So as Anmar pointed out, they had the various protocols, the Japanese Olympic Organizing Committee and the IOC. There was a playbook for everything. Playbook for journalists, playbook for athletes, playbook for support staff. Everything was down to a letter in terms of the protocols and what was expected, etc. For me, it was interesting that as the number of positive tests started to come in, they started to make a distinction between those who had tested positive versus those who had tested positive before arriving or just before arriving. So they made that distinction very clear.
Are you sure Wait. You sure that you were in Barbados or you were in Japan? Because they
No, if you read the releases and stuff, they made a very clear distinction whether this
Yep.
person tested positive in the village versus someone who returned a positive test on arrival in Japan or on their way to Japan. The IOC media arm, especially, they put out that daily positivity rate, so you knew the percentage was X amount. It was never above what is considered a safe, the safe metric. I remember we were talking about 11,000 athletes alone, and you're hearing, it might seem like a lot of positive tests, but then when you compare it with that positivity rate, it was nothing to stop the games from going ahead. We had a slight blip. One of the high profile athletes testing positive in the village.
Sam Kendricks.
The American vaulter, one of the favorites for that event. Yeah, one of the favorites for that event. And that little scurry because that morning, those he would have interacted with, a couple camps had to be locked down out of precaution. But then everybody was cleared. He was withdrawn from the competition. So it was almost as if once that machinery started to roll, it was full steam ahead. I always joke with some of my friends, even if it was Marsha Boyce representing Barbados, who had to be on that track, the Olympic Games would have gone ahead, no questions asked.
Yeah, most
Ricky,
definitely.
Oh, don't worry, I'm ready to get to this shortly. But Ricky, I'm hoping for a Stephen A. or Skip Bayless moment here now. Would you have cancelled or would you have postponed the games as the number of cases start to rise?
No, simply because you had reached the point of no return. The reality of it is you were in a country that's one of the most disciplined in the world, and those disciplines were going to get enforced every step of the way, and that was obvious. So I could see, as Marsha alluded to, I could see high profile athletes or high profile teams running themselves into trouble if they had also tested positive, but they had reached the point of no return. And that was the classic example of the show must go on. Classic example.
You weren't ever concerned about your safety? Did you think at any point that the show should have stopped, or were you comfortable with what happened in Tokyo?
Yeah, I was most definitely comfortable, Justin. I'll tell you this, and I'll share this information with you guys. So prior to arriving in Japan, I think all members associated with the Olympics had to download an app called the OCHA app. And in this OCHA app, you were required to give your daily temperature. You had to fill out this form stating if you had certain symptoms and stuff like that. And also, on the OCHA app, we also had to do daily saliva tests. So it was a case where more or less you put your saliva into a tube, you scan a barcode, and you're giving all this information to the Japanese government. So, I mean, a bit different from what we're accustomed to in Barbados, Justin, but definitely, like Ricky mentioned, the level of discipline and the seriousness surrounding, how Japan was taking the COVID-19 situation. I never thought the games would be canceled. I always said the show must go on. And I only think, probably, Justin, the only thing that would have canceled the games is if we had a death. I think that's probably the only way that the IOC would have said rub dub dub and we can't go anymore. I think a death would have been the only thing that would stop the games.
That's interesting to hear. Oh, go ahead, Marsha. So sorry.
And Justin, no, I just wanted to add that the thing about it, this will be one of those things in hindsight because we're still in the midst of the activity. There's no way to tell what impact, if any, the Olympics had on the actual managing of the pandemic in Japan as a country. So that is something that won't emerge until weeks, maybe months later. But as it stands right now, the show had to go on and it went ahead successfully.
Yep.
Well, interesting that you said the show had to go on, Marsha, because some of the athletes didn't think so. Athletes in terms as it comes now with their mental health, or so Simone Biles, because it is not, I don't know, business as usual for the athletes in this generation. And, all three of us have spoken about this, all four of us spoken at this on Let. So let's start with you, Anmar. Do you think, there is background information to this. Well, sorry, we'll get that. We'll get that. I'm skipping ahead too quickly. We all saw Simone Biles withdraw herself from certain competitions, first team and then individual competitions. Anmar being there, do you think Simone Biles made the right decision to withdraw, given her, I don't know, mental health concerns?
Yeah, I think it was the right decision, Justin. Based on the fact that there was a lot of pressure before the games, pressure with training, pressure with meeting expectations. She came into the Olympics, as a big favorite, a massive medal hope for the USA. Having that pressure on her back. People deal with situations a bit different. So I thought, in her situation, I thought it's probably the best way to deal with the situation would probably, it's a bit of a, I don't want to say shy out, but to take a back step. I was actually surprised too that Naomi Osaka took place in the Olympics. That was a shocker for me, given, her issue as well. And I mean, well, I see Marsha shaking her head, but probably, having the hometown girl effect, she probably kind of had no choice. But if on one hand she's saying she had an issue with mental health, I was still surprised that she said that a couple tournaments ago. And here she's in the Olympics where she's going to be, pressured with the same media at the Olympics. It's the same media that she would have encountered in the tournament that she pulled out. So I mean, it's a situation where I thought, going back to Simone Biles, I thought she made the right decision. And I think, Justin, at the end of the day, it's a personal decision that you have to make.
Ricky, the same question. I know we have grown up in different times where athletes are expected to battle through everything. So, do you agree with Simone Biles' decision to withdraw due to her mental health concerns?
Well, surprisingly, I disagree on one level. I think the challenge in that particular sport is that you had team-based pressure and you had individual pressure. I think that you saw an athlete step aside in a team-based environment. Classic example of perhaps taking one for the team, but in this case, you're the person that is expected to carry the team. So as a result, where I disagreed was it almost felt as if, okay, yes, because you can't handle this pressure and this moment at this particular moment in time, you need to step back and the team has to follow through. Now, obviously, they weren't able to capture the gold medal and the media then packaged it as best they could. So I disagree on the team-based side of it. But again, it's ticklish because we can't ever speak to what's going through an athlete's mind at that particular moment. But there's no question that when you look at then the individual's ability to come back and do at least one individual event with the balance beam, obviously that could raise, I could see how that could raise some eyebrows, because some people in some quarters will think, wait a minute, you weren't able to pull it together for the team-based event representing USA and all that represents to many, but then you were able to find what was required and dig deep for your individual balance beam event and capture, a record-setting medal, bronze medal for that event. So I understand where people will raise an eyebrow and maybe question her thought process at that particular moment. And it's a little different to Naomi Osaka's situation because it's the team-based versus the individual. I could compare it a bit with Stephanie Ann McPherson of the Jamaican team, who was not happy with her outcome in the 400-meter sprint, where she came fourth and missed out on a medal. Had a bit of a meltdown after which, as Marsha was saying earlier, the cameras captured. Not available for the Jamaica 4x4 relay team. When they
there was
had
a report of an injury for her as well.
Yes, there was a report of an injury. We all in sports know that sometimes we pick up these injuries. But yeah, I mean that one was a similar situation in that somebody had to make a decision. So for me, I that also showed me that pressure that the athletes are under when we saw that meltdown. I mean, we're not accustomed to seeing that when we watch those large sporting events.
Just want to add to what you said, though. I'm wondering too if in the state of Stephanie, if there was a lot of pressure. I remember on my way to the Olympic Stadium that morning before the final, I was reading, I think it was the Observer, and I mean the lead of the story said no Jamaican woman had ever won gold in this event. And I mean, I'm wondering if she would have saw, that story that day,
Yeah.
and all of that would have gone to her head.
Yeah.
It was a very well written story, very well put together, very well polished. How the Jamaicans would write it. Very, very, very encouraging. I was actually sold on the fact that she could probably, do
Bingo.
something very, very great there. Yeah, I read the story and I was very sold on it. But I mean, I'm wondering if that pressure probably would have gone to her.
Yeah,
For-
sorry.
No, go ahead, Marsha. Sorry.
No, I was just going to jump in as it related to Stephanie Ann as well. We need to remember on a personal level, on her personal journey, she had almost virtually quit athletics, because
Correct.
of the injuries and the battering her body had taken, and
Yes.
decided, you know what, let me give this one more chance.
Yes.
So imagine now you put your body through this again to come back for one more Olympics. This is as close you will ever get for it to fall apart. I can understand why physically, mentally, everything, it might fall apart for some athletes. I disagree slightly with both of you as it relates to both Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka. If anything, I think that her withdrawal from the French Open and then later Wimbledon was as a result of getting my head ready for the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games was non-negotiable. You are a Japanese for a home Olympics. If one games you had to take part in, it was that. There will be another Wimbledon, there will be another French Open, there will not be another Olympic Games in Japan, potentially in her lifetime. So for me, if anything, it was let me get myself right to perform as best as I can at home. As a caveat to that, we say, oh, Naomi didn't want to talk to the media. It wasn't that Naomi did not want to talk to the media. It was a specific category of, I know I can sound like a Naomi stan right now, but it was a specific category of media activities that she said she wouldn't do. So she was going to do all of the post-match interviews, etc. It was certain press conferences she was going to opt out of. So let us not say, okay, that's a whole other for a whole other time.
I like it. I
but
like it.
It wasn't that she was saying, I am not talking to the media, point blank, period. So to say, okay, you come to the Olympic Games and talking to the same media isn't necessarily a fair equation, so to speak. As it relates to Simone Biles now, I agree with her withdrawal 1000% on three basic reasons. As you guys mentioned, it is a personal decision, and for me, mental health is serious. And if we accept as a society that mental health is a serious thing, that level of concern must also extend to athletes. Athletes are human beings first and foremost. So let us start there. So we can't pick and choose or be convenient when we accept, okay, you know what, mental health is a serious thing. Two, where Ricky was saying in terms of it being a team competition and she pulled out, I actually agree with that simply because she almost fell off the vault. Had she fallen off another apparatus, that would have decimated the team scores. They would not have been in medal contention. So from where I sit as a gymnast, not that I'm a gymnast, but if I was a gymnast, in a team competition and you were underperforming, you pull out, because if you fall, you can't really recover once those scores go below a certain tally. So for me, it would have been better to pull out, and as we saw, Sunili stepped up and did what she had to do. As it relates to them being back in time to compete in the individual balance beam now, Simone Biles found a private gym and literally had to rework all of her routines.
Yep.
That takes a certain level of, I don't know what, because you saw the videos of her falling flat on her face over and over and over to try to recover in time to at least be able to do one individual event. And then the third, and some may argue the most important point for me as it related to Simone's withdrawal, of safety. Gymnastics is a pretty sport, but gymnastics is also a very dangerous sport. We hear the gymnasts talk about the twisties, where you get lost in the air, and over or under rotation could leave you paralyzed. You could lose your life. Like, the physical consequences to me are so much that if for any reason you are uncertain, you can't be running up to a vault and second guessing yourself. That is a recipe for disaster. So from where I sit, even just as a safety concern, you pull out, you will live to vault another day. That's where I sit on that.
Very well said, Marsha.
What has me though is that Marsha has come to the defense of both Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka.
It has nothing. with them being female if that's the road you're going down.
No,
Okay.
you know we better that.
Okay.
But he did not come to defense of Bajan journalists in that shot that Anmar took by saying that Jamaican writers in the way that they write. That is what happened. Marsha did not take a second to defend Bajan journalism. It wasn't lost on me there.
I probably missed that point.
This
I
Nike
thought
one.
and Appleton sponsorship.
I saw the shot that Anmar took at Bajan journalists. It wasn't lost on me. But the biggest irony, because sports has a way of being so ironic, is none other than Novak Djokovic, arguably the greatest men's player of all time, saying that pressure is...
Roger Federer. Just had to throw that in there. Roger Federer. Continue.
I'll let that slide. But he said pressure at this level is a privilege. And the irony of the situation is a couple days later, he has a meltdown. Throws his racket in the stands, loses his semi-final singles match, and then refuses to turn up for doubles. But nonetheless, this is not about him. This is more about what he brought to light. So I will start with you, Anmar. Agree with Novak Djokovic, is pressure a privilege? And that being said, should athletes at this level be required to compete no matter the situation?
Yeah, I funny enough, I do agree with this statement. Pressure is a privilege, especially when you talk about competing at slams and competing at the Olympics. However, like Marsha has previously said, these athletes are human. At the end of the day, they're human beings and they're not robots. And what I would say though is that you have to be able to manage the pressure and you have to know your limits. And Simone Biles, she knew her limits. It's as simple as that. And to answer the second question, I would say no. They should not be required to compete under all circumstances. Like I mentioned before, there has to be some sort of stop. And you have to know when enough is enough. And it's like your body, Justin. You know when you're tired. You know when you've done enough work. You know when you've said, you know what, I can't go no more. And it's as simple as that. It's no different when we talk about athletics, when we talk about sport on the whole.
Ricky, I don't peg you for Novak Djokovic. Is he correct in intimating that athletes should be, at this level at least, at the highest level, should compete regardless of circumstance?
The irony in this coming from Djokovic, this is the same gentleman who went to Australia, had to go through their stringent 14-day quarantine. The mother of all meltdowns. Out of all the athletes in the world that went through it, he threw the mother of all meltdowns, right? I can't forget that because that happened recently. Spare a thought for his doubles partner. You fly all the way to Tokyo. You go through all of what Anmar described in terms of the twice a day, COVID testing, all of the protocols. You do all of that, and you're prepared for your moment because you're playing with world's number one. You figuring there's a doubles goal for sure, at least a medal, if not a goal.
It was a bronze medal match that he pulled out ahead of.
So you're on the eve of securing an Olympic medal, right? And the number one ranked player who has the privilege of handling this pressure throws away your entire dream and your one moment in time, rest in peace, Whitney Houston, on her birthday today, throws that away because he needs to have a selfish meltdown. And your whole dream is gone on the eve of a bronze medal game. Like to me, that's where my mind went when I thought about that. So there's a hypocrisy to Djokovic being the one to say that because his actions have really lived up to his words in that context. So if you gave me that statement from another athlete who has shown me based on the behavior that this is the way they carry and conduct themselves, I could agree. But that is not the individual to be making that statement.
Marsha, I already know where you stand on Novak Djokovic, and it's the reason why.
I don't have to comment on Novak Djokovic, but what I will say in terms of athletes being able to perform under every circumstance, no athlete goes out there to lose. Worse yet, at the level of the Olympic Games, no athlete goes out there with the intention of losing or with the intention of deliberately underperforming, unless we're talking about match fixing or something like that. So if we're not talking about something like that, No athlete goes out there looking to underperform. Athletes will prepare as well as they can, but as with anything in life, some days things just don't work out. Some days things fall apart, and it's just that their failures, quote unquote, will then play out on a very global scale for everybody to see, for everybody to scrutinize, for everybody to pick apart. But also, too, for this games, let's not forget that we are in the midst of a pandemic that has had a major impact on human beings as a whole. Athletes' preparations were disrupted. You know, some of them struggled. Some had COVID and had to try to recover all of those different variables. Some had zero access to facilities because their
Yeah.
country was under lockdown. All of these things we need to look at in terms of being able to perform at this level. And many of them rose to the occasion. Most of us cannot dream of subjecting our bodies to what they do to be able to compete
Nope.
at that level. So I am not going to say, oh, you should be able to do this and you should be able to do that. No. Because yes, as all of us have said, athletes are humans first, but athletes are also professionals. Many of them are ultra competitive and they don't ever set up to deliberately underperform. So it's not my judgment to make.
Agree.
You do know what athletes should be able to do, though? They should be able to hand in tests, as in your drug tests. But apparently, this does not happen for every single country or every single team. Shout out to Team Nigeria, who have
Athletes don't test themselves.
well,
Yeah.
camps do though. So, at least one of them did test positive though, and that would be none other than Blessing Okabari, a medal contender at those just concluded Tokyo Games. So we'll start with you, Anmar. Did her negative test the
Positive
cloud of
test.
suspicion around? Oh, sorry, positive test. So sorry, and the cloud of suspicion around Team Nigeria being there on the ground. Did that cast or did that put a negative connotation around the Tokyo game for you? Tokyo game for you.
Justin, I'll tell you what. There was a bit of a buzz the day before we got this news. I'll let you in on this information. I don't know if
Love
it was I don't know if I should say a rumor or there was some sort of information that came to us that it was actually a Jamaican athlete had tested positive. That's the news that we were all hearing, and it was not only the Caribbean camp. A number of my friends on the ground, United Kingdom, were messaging, we were communicating on Twitter, and there was information stating that it was actually a Jamaican athlete who had tested positive. That's the big news that we were all waiting
That
to
person
break.
got hot and sweaty and jumped the gun.
Numerous tweets went around. I mean, Justin, it was a big buzz checks. I did several calls, several checks on the ground. People were checking, but we could not confirm the information, could not confirm that I was a Jamaican. So those story was brought about. Really not surprised the next day that an athlete had tested positive. I was actually surprised that I was Blessing, but I don't think that it really cast a negative light on the games. What I would say negatively, it had a bit of a impact on the women's 100-meter final cast. I'll say that because here we were looking for, this big mouth-watering showdown in terms of big names. The world was already sad that Sha'Carri Richardson could not be in Tokyo.
I think Americans were sad that she got in Tokyo.
Yes, Americans were sad, not the world. The world
Not
was
the
fine.
world.
Let's be honest.
The world was
Let's
fine.
be honest, Justin. Let's be honest, Justin. We wanted that showdown. Whether or not Sha'Carri would lose badly or Sha'Carri would win, we wanted to see it because obviously of what was going on. She was more or less taunting the Jamaicans a bit. There was a bit of a lead up. So we wanted to see that. And then obviously Blessing, she was also a medal contender. So I mean, I would say that it made the women's before the actual race and before the finals, I personally would have said, that it kind of took away a bit of a sting out of the event. But obviously, we went on to see a fantastic show and a fantastic women's 100-meter final. So I would not say that it cast a bit of being on the ground. I would say that there was talk about it, but no one more or less dwelled on the fact that, she had tested positive. Perhaps, probably not a big enough name.
No Caribbean bias, of course, here. So, Ricky, did Blessings positive test, did that, mar the games in your league?
I would say no. The reality of it is the hardcore track and field fan. You kind of notice when an athlete is starting to change their look, so to speak. So there were a few athletes that had a little cloud over them, and she was one of them. I can't pretend. I too communicate with people who are really rabid track and field fans, and we were not surprised in the least. So no, I wouldn't say that at all. I think.
What did you see, Ricky? What did you see though?
We saw athletes. I'm talking about the COVID period. So between last year early and this year, a lot of certain athletes were not competing or not making themselves available for certain meets, even though they had a level of access. So with that came concern over, okay, what's going on? Where are we not seeing these athletes coming out, but other athletes are coming out? Even when they had that run up with the Diamond League Series, the one that you would have referenced or someone referenced before relative to some of the performances, we were not seeing her at those meets. So it kind of made you wonder, okay, why is this particular athlete not available in the lead up? So sometimes when that happens, I know people start to question or assign reasons to why an athlete may be unavailable in the Diamond League lead up events to something like the Olympic Games or the World Championships.
I know we got the Jamaican sweep that we all want here in the Caribbean, but still, did Blessings positive test, did that mar the games in any way in your opinion?
Not for me personally, because while she was a main final contender, she was not in my list of medal contenders, if I'm being honest.
Agreed.
She was not in my list of medal contenders. She would have made the final, but I didn't have her as a medal contender. And you notice that so she ran the first round, had a very good looking first round race, but once the semifinals got underway, it was almost, you forgot the test that went before CAS, etc., and his ban was upheld. But I guess maybe somewhere along the line, you know how the rumor mill goes, somebody heard something about Jamaican get hot and sweaty,
I framed it.
put out this cryptic tweet, and it went all over the world. As it relates to, though, the games being clouded by doping allegations, that is something, again, that comes with in retrospect. For this year's games, it was reported they're estimated to take about 5,000 tests. But remember, these samples are held for about 10 years, and they can be retested over that period of 10 years. Just to give you some numbers, the London Olympic Games, you might not think about it as being, a doping games, for argument's sake. But after the fact, they had over 100 positive tests. 42 medals were taken away. Most of those, incidentally, with breaches were Russian. You had a situation in one weightlifting competition, 8 of the 14 finalists have been barred. 8 of 14. But because it is so removed from when the actual event took place, you tend not to have that cloud over the event unless you're somebody who's really into the anti-doping world and so forth. And I suspect, unless it is a massive high-profile name, you're going to have a similar thing with Tokyo. You anticipate there will be some positive cases coming through, but you don't expect that it will overshadow anything that happened. And as you said, there were 11,000 athletes at the games. If 100 out of 11,000 test positive, when you look at numbers and ratios, you might not see that as, not so much, not as big a deal that would put a damper over the entire event.
That's not the only topical controversy coming out of these games. Of course, we live in a different era. So one of those, let me try to word this correctly, was the barring of several athletes with differences in sex development, or what we term now as DSD, from events over distances between 400 to 1,500 meters. 2 Namibian teenage sprinters, and I'll let y'all pronounce their names because I will not even attempt to try on the show, had them to step down to the 200 meters, and both of them eventually made the women's final. So I will start with you, Ricky. Does World Athletics now have a major challenge on its hand going forward with DSD?
Yeah, definitely. This is a hot button topic in my circles because it feels as if it's really the athletes from the African nations that are being targeted. Certainly, that's how it felt in the lead up to these games. Questions are now being asked, what about the athletes, for example, in the field events from countries that have a strong legacy of some very athletic female throwers, for example. I'm not going to call the names of those countries, but we know who those countries are. So I think right now that's gonna definitely take center stage. I think people are also obviously transposing that against what we're seeing with the transgender athletes and their ability to participate, largely dependent on some of the countries they're from as well. But because the athletes in question, Justin, are all from African nations, it does beg a question. One thing on my end where I'm a little disappointed is that I think at some point, some of the groups representing women in sports need to stand up and really probe this a lot more. They need to ask some more questions, because I think we are in danger of it feeling as if only certain countries are being targeted. Because if we're looking at it based on what it's supposed to be, in terms of these unnaturally high testosterone levels based on the standards that's been set, it's kind of strange to think that that would genetically happen only in a certain part of the world and nowhere else. You understand what I mean? Like that seems a little abnormal. Logically, that doesn't make sense to me. We should be seeing that, I would imagine, across the world. But definitely someone's going to have to take up that mantle and run with it and shed some more light, because right now it really does feel like they are targeting certain countries, unfortunately, and some other quarters are very silent on the matter, which in itself is part of the problem, I would believe.
Anmar, Marsha, go ahead. You wanted to get in so quickly.
I just wanted to add, bear in mind that we will only know about the athletes who opt not to take the medication. And that might be why, because these two, Beatrice Masalinga and Christina Mbama, they're not the only two GSD. The two Namibian sprinters. They're not the only two GSD athletes. But remember, you can compete in those events, the 400 up to the 1500, if you accept to take the medication to lower your testosterone level. So when we think about the Caster Semenya and Duty Chan from India, she was actually one of the first athletes that this issue came up with. Only those who are not willing to take that medication are the ones you will really hear about, because then those cases become public, unfortunately. And that is why you will have that scenario. For me, where the issue comes is there an issue? You have a rule, and particularly the two sprinters, Masalinga and Mbama, they complied with the rules. The rule says you cannot compete between 400 meters and 1500 meters without taking this medication. So as quarter milers, they decided, let me try my hand at the 200 meters, because the rule does not cover those events. Now, is the rule flawed? That is an entirely different discussion. Is the data that was used to enforce the rule, is that data flawed? There is lots of research where scientists are going back and forth whether the data is flawed to begin with, as well as the application, because the data showed that testosterone advancement can happen in other events which are not covered by this rule.
Here.
Do we anticipate that this rule will change? Most likely. I am not surprised if it will change. However, what that change would or should look like, again, is debatable. Some might say, okay, let's just have a blanket rule covering all events and not stipulating very specific distances and so forth. But as it stands for these games, particularly the two athletes in question, they complied with the rules as currently exist. So I can't fault them for that.
Anmar, same question. Do you think world athletics will have major issues with differences in sex development as we go forward?
Yeah, I think we'll have different issues. A lot of problems probably will come out. And I think a lot of stories will come out of this, Justin. But my personal take on it is that I just think that world athletics needs to be consistent, you know? It's as simple as that. And I definitely don't believe the ladies didn't make themselves. And I believe that they should be able to compete. That It's as simple as that. I don't know if it will be an advantage. I don't know if it will be a disadvantage, but I believe that they should be able to compete in their events. I don't see a problem with it.
Well, you know me. We've been told that this show is too negative, and we have indeed spent a lot of time on controversy. So let's make this a little bit more lighthearted and flip the script there, producer Neil. Let's get to the most memorable performances. And I'll start with you, Anmar. For you, what were your most memorable performances from an athlete standpoint, or what were the top performances in your estimation?
Yeah, well, quite a few, Justin. I'll give you all, and then I'll probably have to pick a top one. Obviously, Elaine Thompson-Herah, 10:61, the Olympic record, outstanding. I mean, she's pointing at the clock around the 75 meter, 80 meter. I mean, that's outstanding. And then to come back and do the double, first woman to do the double. I mean, oh my gosh, amazing. That's just one athlete. We talk about Sefan Hassan from the Netherlands. I mean, she did the 15, she did the 10,000, and she did the 5,000. I can't remember. I think it was in the 15. She was up, she tripped, she fell, got up, and still won the race. I mean, absolutely amazing. I mean, in the mid zone, we asked her about that, and she said there was just an adrenaline rush
as well.
Correct. There was just an adrenaline rush, and she actually said that she felt like she drank 12 cups of coffee. I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
Believe what I was seeing, could not believe what I was hearing. And, to top it off, I think Vollmer, the men's 400 meter hurdles, 45.9, Justin, mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. That's how I would describe it. So I think those three are definitely up there for me. I was definitely impressed with the pole vaulter, Mondo Duplantis. I thought his performance was definitely definitely good as well. David Warner, the Canadian first man to win the decathlon, that's also outstanding performance. And I think he's 31 as well. So if you look at age too, don't want to bring age into it, but I mean, at 31, you would expect that probably someone younger win an event like that. And he told us he had a lot of struggles, training facilities and stuff like that, to come back and to win like that. Absolutely outstanding. So I think those four, for me, there's also some other standouts. Sky Brown, in skateboarding, 13 years old, Great Britain. She won a gold. I think that was outstanding too. And there was a 17-year-old US swimmer. I can't remember her name. Marsha, Ricky, you guys could. I can't remember her name, but she was a total shock winning her event. I think those five for me, or six, would be the standout performances.
Ricky, what about you? Most memorable performances and top swimmings at the Tokyo Games.
All right, I'm gonna start with my guy Parchment from Jamaica. The story, the injuries. There was a point during this year he couldn't even physically train on the track. He could only train in the water. He's also a graduate at the University of West Indies, so they have to big him up on there. And then he gave us a story by way of storytelling. I mean, Parchment dropped a story yesterday or day before, where he told you about his experience on the day of the semifinals, taking the wrong bus, ending up by an aquatic center that was having rowing or something, speaking to a volunteer who eventually lent him the money to be able to take a taxi to get to the warm-up track and be able to do his semifinal. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't even have been there to
and the
go
venues
out on that.
Close, Ricky.
Oh yeah, well, I could imagine. So to watch that story and how that unfold, a lot of West Indians and people all over the world said, well, Parchment definitely raised right. But there was layers of emotion to that, because all of us, when we heard that story, racing, just listening to that story, imagining how we would be on the eve of Olympic semifinal, you in the wrong thing, as Anmar said, the venues are not close, and you're going into a mild panic now because you need to get to the track and field warm-up track.
Along with the language barrier, Ricky.
Correct. So Parchment really hit home with me because I know he's been at it for a while. I know that he is one of the athletes that for me epitomizes that this thing really is a journey. He's one of the athletes that you could argue benefited from the games being postponed by a year. And I frame him because also there was a lot of controversy in Jamaica. Omar basically felt that he was entitled. Coming back to the audacity pandemic, he had the audacity to suggest that even though he had not qualified in the top three, that he should have been selected. And it was a hot button topic in Jamaica for quite a few weeks. You had people who were in his camp and people who basically the other athletes were kind of nameless and faceless. So I was very proud to see that because these guys basically went on then to win gold and bronze. So he was one for me for sure. I can't forget Sade Williams. She trains with the MVP Track Club in Jamaica. She has believed in the concept that iron sharpens iron and put herself in a position to train with them and to get better. So I remember just we felt away as Bajans to see that she ran that time. It was the fastest time ever in a semi-final to not make the final. But I look on at an athlete like that towards the future, towards Oregon next year for the track and field world championships and say, you know what? This could be a tipping point for this athlete. This could be a moment by which, this time next year, we're saying that she's made the world championship final for the 400. And the reason I select her is because she felt a lot of criticism from people who felt that she should have run the 200. And she made a decision along with her management team and stood by it to commit to the 400. Even the great Obadele Thompson kind of semi-apologized on the Sports Max broadcast because he was one who felt she should have done the 2. And then he commended her based on her courage and her courageous run. I mean, in a field that had the same McPherson and the great Alison Felix. So I was very proud there. And yes, I was gonna get to the 2 Bahamians because again, they you read some of those stories, they really didn't have a lot of access in the Bahamas because of the pandemic. They really weren't able to get out and compete. Their relay team wasn't even able to go to compete to be able to qualify. So Stephen Gardner and Shawnee really had to put it together, piece it together, literally duct tape it or K-tape it together to be able to stand at the line and do that. So I was very proud there as well. And there was a meme that joked about welcome to the 2021 Tokyo Carifta Games. And I really felt that because it tells me that we are doing something right in this part of the world, when we can see that dominance translate to that level. So I felt good about that. And it speaks to the fact that some of these athletes, because they were so accustomed, in my mind, in dealing with adversity, when they were thrown into this position of adversity, they adapted better than some of their counterparts in some of the other countries.
Same question, Marsha. Your most memorable moments and top performances.
Wow, I guess, first of all, let me declare I have a bias to track and field. So, like the others, a lot of my top moments and memorable moments and top performances came from track and field. But as a result of that, I'm going to then start with the two swimmers that really stood out to me. Caleb Dressel from the USA, 6 events, 5 gold medals, 3 of them being individual goals. You can't argue against that type of a performance. As well as Emma, I keep messing up her last name, McCoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Neil, have we lost Marsha there for a second?
Then turning my attention to the track, like Ricky and Anmar, we share some of the same top performances. Elaine Thompson, hero, performing that double-double, as we're now going to call it, with some very impressive times. Sifan Hassan, that superhuman performance, I don't know what she's thinking, because that treble is, to attempt the treble is one thing. Medal in all 3 events is another thing. To get 2 gold medals out of 3 is phenomenal. I don't know if we'll ever see that again. Then, like Sade Williams, I was at work at the time. I was screaming. I was villain Sade along with the veins in my neck. That's how I know I could never be an athlete, because I get too emotional. But breaking that 43-year-old national record. That is nothing to sneeze at. 43, that's longer than I've been alive. That record has stood for. We also saw some other world records in track and field. Anmar mentioned Karsten Volholm in that 400-meter hurdles, and that was, to me, that was the race of the Olympic Games simply because of the performances it produced. First, second, and third going under the old world record. Fourth place running under the old Olympic record. The first man to go under 46 seconds. He clocked 45.90, was it 93, 94?
94.
That's some people
94.
flat 4 times.
Flat 4,
Had he competed in the flat 4 with that time, he would have been, I think there were 18 other people behind him in the flat 400 at these Olympic Games. So when you really think about those numbers, that is absolutely phenomenal. Julimar Rojas from Venezuela, she's been knocking at that world record in triple jump. Finally got it this time around. And we also had another world record for hurdles again, Sydney McLaughlin from the USA. I must say the ladies really turned up and showed out at these Olympic Games. These Olympic Games were really dominated by females, and we love to see that because especially this was touted as one of the first truly gender equal games in terms of medals and in terms of number of participants. So we love to see that, the women are not just making up a number, they're really putting out world record breaking performances. From a feel-good perspective now, because I love a good story, there were several feel-good, memorable moments for me. First of all, men's high jump. Mutaz Essa Barsham is my favorite high jumper after Javier Sotomayor. So I love to see Barsham jump. And that gold medal sharing with him and Gianmarco Tamberi of Italy for me was a moment that you won't see. When two athletes decide, you know what, we're going to share this gold medal. And if you know their backstory, the struggle both of them have had with injuries, and that's how they actually became friends, with Barsham trying to talk Tamberi into not giving up on the sport. And then they developed a friendship out of that. Then for them to reach the highest level and share a gold medal, that's all the storylines for me. Karani James will forever be one of my favorite athletes. It is not easy to medal in an event, to medal in 3 consecutive Olympic Games, battling injury and Graves' disease. That is phenomenal for him. And I'm glad, and the loss of his mom. Yes, that is true. So to see Stephen win the gold medal and Karani hold on and fight through for that bronze, that was, I almost felt better for Karani than I did for Stephen, knowing what Karani has gone through over the years. And then Andre DeGrasse missed the podium. If there is a medal to get, he is going to get it. And he is going to get it. And again, for him, separate and apart from him having Caribbean roots, Barbadian and Trinidadian, he had a lot of challenges with injuries, and people were already talking about him as, a good sprinter that never lived up to his performances. He was supposed to be the heir apparent to Bolt, and he just never stepped up. But here we have him, particularly in that 200 meters. When you look at the time, that 19.6, that's not the time to sneeze at, And then piloting his team to that the medal in the relay. He has medaled in every major Olympic game, and I think it's every major meet that he has competed at. So if we're talking about big day horses, he is a big day horse. And then finally, Allyson Felix, I guess the darling for everybody, being able to pick up not 1 but 2 medals in her final Olympic Games. Allyson Felix has medals in every single Olympics she's competed in since Athens 2004. When you put that into perspective, not that she's competed in every Games, she has medaled in every single game since Athens 2004. A total of 11 medals, 7 of them gold. That is definitely, a career that can definitely be proud of. There's no questioning what Allyson Felix has done for USA track and field. I know I said a lot, but I could go on and on and on because track and field, and I could go on forever.
Well done, Marsha.
Clearly, we don't have to ask Marsha if she considers this the best track and field event or competition ever for an Olympics. So we obviously got a yes from Marsha. So Anmar,
but go ahead. I said I can tell why I think so, but go ahead.
Well, I'm going to get you last because you went on and on and on and on and on. We love it, but we obviously know how you feel about this track and field competition. So Anmar, for you, given all that Marsha's already said, is this the best track and field competition you have ever seen?
Well, Justin, I'm not sure that I can. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's definitely a tough one because obviously being there, I would have some type of emotional connection with it. But I was very, very impressed with both London 2012, both 20s. I'm a sold on boat. I'm a boat kid. I grew up on boat.
You raised on both.
raised on boat. Raised on boat. So I mean, I would have to say no to your question. What was interesting to note though, this Olympics is that no American man won an individual gold on the track. I think that was very, very, very interesting to note. But is it the best athletics? No. Like I'm still sold on both Beijing, both London 2012 and both Rio 2016. I'm sorry.
Ricky, for you, same thing. I know you're a huge track and field man. I know, like Anmar said, you are happy to see no American man getting gold on the track. So for you, was this the greatest track and field competition that you have ever seen at the highest level?
I will have to say no. For the females, yes. In terms of the women and the performances across the board from the women, yes. The women, yes, without a doubt, because we saw for the first time that tension. We saw new athletes come along, and we saw some of the legacy athletes, like Marsha said, show you why they are among the greats, right? And you saw a double queen emerge. So there's storylines from the women. Tapper from Jamaica, not even 5'1" in the 100-meter hurdles. There's storylines all across the board. The young lady who won the bronze in the marathon, who had not even run a marathon. She was working 2 jobs and just decided, well, I'm gonna take this thing seriously, and boom, we win an Olympic bronze. So women, without a doubt, is the best I've ever seen. But the men disappointed me. So I can't do it because the men were so disappointing. And on the media side, because the American men were not performing well, as Anmar said, the US media did not cover these games like they normally would, because they were struggling. Let's say what it is. So yep. I was turning on a lot of the US networks. I was turning to sources that would normally be giving me an opinion and a worldview, and I was not getting any content, any opinion, or any worldview, because it was almost like they decided, okay, we're not covering this track and field experience because we don't like what we are seeing. Yep. So from that perspective, I'm not saying that we have to get validation from them, but there's no question that Bolt's brand and the grandness that Bolt brought gave the track and field element of the games, a feeling, and you had no choice but to cover it because the big man was there. I knew that there would be some drop off without Bolt, but I didn't think that the men's side of the Olympics did the games the kind of justice that the women delivered. And I have a theory that a bit of that is wrapped in the women's ability to adapt to all of the adversity versus the male athletes. A lot of these male athletes disappointed me. When you read the storylines, Justin, a lot of these guys seem to have lost enthusiasm and seem to have lost focus. And I thought it would have been different, but that was not the case with these games.
Justin, if I could, right before you get to Marsha, I just want to add a bit to what Ricky said, and it's very interesting, hearing what he's talked about with, the coverage coming from USA, and it was definitely that same sense in the mid zone with the American journalists. I worked very closely with them. Obviously, doing interviews, the American athletes would stop with their media first before going to, the rest of the written press. And there was a sense of shock and disappointment with the American journalists. And I actually overheard a conversation in the media press center. This was a conversation between one of the USA officials, and he was on the phone. I don't know if he was speaking to someone back in the US or there in Tokyo. He's saying, it's going horribly wrong. We're definitely struggling. Just bare silver, not a goal. And that speaks to, how they see, their athletes and how prestigious that gold medal is for them. And there was a big disappointment, especially when the hurdler Grant Holloway got silver. You know, they were looking at Holloway. I can tell you this, given what was happening, they were looking at Holloway as their savior, Justin. He was supposed to be the hero in Tokyo, and it just did not happen, and it really fell apart. And I saw one of the journalists literally in tears.
I wasn't there, but I can tell you where I am. I was on watching or trying to watch the two NBC channels that are bringing the Olympics. USA, which is an NBC affiliate or owned by NBC, and Peacock. And I can tell you, was so bad. I did not get to watch that historic women's 200-meter live. I did not get to watch it live, and I won't tell you what was showing. I won't tell you what was showing in place of it, but it should not have been. So, Marsha, clearly, you felt that it was one of the best track and field athletes or competitions you ever watched. But wait.
I would say yes, and this is both as a fan, and then if I put on an objective hat and look at the statistics and so forth, I would say definitely yes. And we need to be careful. Yes, we all love Usain Bolt, and Usain Bolt has spoiled us, but we need to be a little bit objective when we come down off the high. The 0 that Lamont ran to win the 100 meters, Lamont Jacobs, would have beaten Bolt in Rio. He would have won the gold medal in Rio with Usain Bolt in that race with that same time. No, we're talking times. If we're talking times, the 9.80, which won the men's 100 meter in 2020, was faster than the time clocked in Rio 2016. So to say that the men were a disappointment, we need to be careful with our language, because again, that time would have been a gold medal winning time in Rio with Usain Bolt in that race. Even in 200 meters, again, 19.6 is not a time to sneeze at. Yes, Bolt and Johan Blake have produced some phenomenal times, but in the grand scheme of things, these are not full times, so to speak. From World Athletics themselves, now don't take it from me, they are calling these games a history-making games for track and field, because you had 3 world records being set at the Olympic Games. 12 Olympic records were broken. 28 area records were set. 151 national records were broken. As far as world athletics is concerned, this is the best track and field competition we have had at an Olympic Games. Even if you break it down by age group, of the teenagers that showed up and showed out, those between 19 and 21, 14 athletes under the age of 23 won medals, 6 of them gold. Again, from a world athletics perspective, this looks very good for them, because you know, okay, this is not a fly-by-night thing. We have stock in the tank, so to speak. The track was fast, and we saw that the fast times that were produced, probably not for some of the jumpers. They would have complained that it was a little bit too fast for them in terms of, you know, getting their run-ups and stuff, right? The field event coverage, I must say, we got to see a lot more of the field events, and that allowed for us to become a bit more involved in the field events, and really you built that momentum as you were approaching the 5th and 6th round in some of these field events.
NBC or USA, trust me, you did not want.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Justin. I will agree with you that it depended on who told the story. It really did. These games depended on who told the story.
Caribbean coverage.
Yes.
So I guess my viewpoint, or the umbrella on which the lines through which I'm seeing the games is a bit different. We got to see a lot more of the field events. So you got to see how competitive each and every field event was.
True.
I can't think about maybe except the men's discuss with style. Outside of that, pretty much every single field event was very competitive. And that is not the norm for an Olympic Games. So if we take off our Usain Bolt glasses, and we love Usain Bolt, we still, in context, when you look at the records that were broken, the number of personal best set, the age group of people competing, even the medals across the board, where you had now, I think it was about 40 different countries winning medals for the first time in track and field alone. That in itself sets up, you know, the platform for this to be considered one of the best. If I won't go as far as saying the best, because I haven't seen them all, but one of the best athletics competitions at an Olympic Games.
Marsha, I think Ricky was a bit I think Ricky was a bit emotional when he made the disappointment statement. Obviously, because you know it was
saying that
it
very
was the
disappointed.
first
Very
time. It was the first time, probably. I think you could correct me, since probably what that not a Jamaican or American were in the finals of the 100 meter. I think Ricky's point was probably a bit emotional. Ricky, I'll take you on here.
Yes, no, I agree. Also, Trinidad and Tobago. Let's also add Trinidad and Tobago didn't capture a track and field medal at these games either. So they have a bit of self-reflection as well. Because it's the first time trying to remember since which games, maybe Barcelona, that they weren't able to capture a medal in track and field also. So there are some countries that left Tokyo in serious reflective mode as well.
yeah.
So disappointment from probably a Caribbean, point of view in terms of the men.
Yeah, even the US. I mean, let's be real. United States men didn't perform well either.
They
so,
didn't perform well.
Yeah.
This was actually their lowest games turnout in history in terms of medals in track and field.
Y'all are making my job easy because that's the last segment and the one that's coming out right now. So, Ricky, since you are so eager to get on that situation, the American men did not capture a single goal on the track whatsoever. Not one, not in the 100, not in the 2, not in the 4, not in the 8, not in the 15, not in the 100, 110 hurdle. So, very sorry. I could go on and on and on, not a single one. So then, is that fair enough to say they're disappointed in Tokyo?
Yes, there's no question that when you look at resources, when you look at access to funds, when you look at the level of sponsorships and the preparation that you have at the collegiate level and that you have beyond that, there's no question that they underperformed. I think there was a sense of entitlement, and I will use that word audacity one more time, because if flip it this time, I had the audacity to prepare, to recognize that this extra year that we're getting to prepare is going to give us a chance to be better. And you saw athletes from you name it, from Norway, from wherever, basically show up and be counted in these games. And I think it was an underlying message that the Americans are now frustrated. The Carl Lewis statement about he saw AAU athletes perform better than what he saw displayed by the American relay team, for example. The irony of the Kevin Hart,
The NBC video.
Yeah, the NBC video. And then the irony that they got the stick around and still finished 5th in the semifinal. So there are definitely layers to that. But I actually do think that one's ability to react and adapt to adversity played up in this case. Holloway shocked me. As a former 110 hurdler, I would have lost money on that one because I figured the race was his.
Yeah, but, never lost a race for the year.
Exactly, and I follow his career from Florida Gators days. But I was happy with the outcome for Parchment. So I mean, there's no question, and we will probably see a lot happen because let's be real, the World Championships are on their doorstep next year. So I don't see them after what happened in Tokyo. I don't see the US men. They will find a new batch of male athletes first in track and field before they allow that to happen in Oregon next year, because the world is going to be at your door, in your backyard for the World Championships in Oregon.
Underperformed? Did the Americans men really and truly underperform in Tokyo?
Most definitely, Justin. Most definitely. And the great Carl Lewis came out and he spoke out on the situation. You know, it's bad when the legends of the sports are talking about it. It's as simple as that. Like I mentioned, the biggest disappointment for me, though, Justin, would be Bromell. Bromell would be the biggest disappointment for me. Yeah. I mean, after what's his name, Christian Coleman was ruled out of the Olympics, Bromell had the world-leading time over 100 meters, Justin.
9.71.
9.71. And it gave Americans the sense of feeling that, there's no Christian Coleman, but Bromell could get the job done. I saw him, Justin, in the first round, never looked like himself.
Terrible.
He looked horrible, Justin.
Yes.
Absolutely horrible out there. I mean, I could not believe what I was seeing. I went up in the trash tribune because I wanted to see him firsthand. Utterly disappointed in what I saw. I thought he would have been the biggest disappointment in the US team.
Easily.
And given what was happening around, they had people like Michael Norman. He was expected to do well as well. Cherry, those guys were expected,
Curly.
Curtly as well to do good performances. And then it never really came. I don't want to say it fell apart. It never came together. And then when the time now for the men's 110-meter hurdles, Americans had the sense that if there's one guy that could get the job done, that could save us, that could be the hero, it would be Grant Holloway. And I mean, who could blame them, Justin? Coming into the Olympics, this guy was undefeated.
There was a watch party. Did you guys see the video from the Holloway watch party? That was hilarious. Yeah.
The guy was undefeated coming in. So, I mean, like Ricky said, if I was a betting man, I would put my money on Grant Holloway before the race. But obviously, as the race progressed, he looked so good. He was definitely off to his very traditional explosive start. He gets to the hurdle. He's the first man to the hurdles. Let's be honest. He's the first man to the hurdle. But I mean, we saw Parchment never gave up. Levy, they never gave up. And I mean, as soon as it was a flat race, Grant Holloway was in trouble, big trouble. And he ended up with his silver. And I thought, that was probably, after Bromell, that was probably the number two in terms of disappointment.
Levy almost caught him at the line, Anmar. He could have easily ended up with a bronze. That's true.
Yeah, correct.
So Marsha, I have to believe then the consensus is that they underperformed. So we have a question in the chat to mix it up for you. Was it a case that these American men early, or why do you think that they underperformed?
That was going to be part of my answer. One, or let me deal with the second part of the question first in terms of peaking too early and so forth. I think yes, for like Bromell and stuff, he did a lot of running very early in the season. He was running from last year. He was actually one of the few sprinters who was actually churning out those kind of times in 2020, in the latter half of 2020, when most of the other side of the world wasn't. So he's done a lot of running. For those who might have been collegiate athletes, who had a long collegiate season, then coming in to the Olympics, that also plays a factor. But for me, I don't want to see it so much as the USA underperforming, but more so as the rest of the world catching up. Because when you look at, they were not beaten by substandard times.
True.
So if it was a case that, let's say the 100-meter final was won in a time of 10:02, then I can understand that. But you had some stellar time beating them. Like Roy Benjamin was another consideration for a gold medal, but a world record time defeated him. So when you put certain things in context, they were beaten by some very stellar performances. It is more heartwarming to see the diversity that is coming through in track and fields. You're seeing the Moroccos, the Polands, and events other than field events. You had Burkina Faso in the jumps. Like, I would rather see that. So I would hope it is that the rest of the world is catching up more so than the US underperforming. And if anything, then maybe we can consider COVID being a leveler of sorts. And these games were very personal for a lot of athletes. And a lot of athletes ran from a very personal perspective. They went out there with an added sense of motivation after an extremely difficult year. And I think a lot of that spilled out over into the track.
But Marsha, an American journalist would say that you're really just polishing it up. From an American point of view, they've underperformed.
But that's all well and good for them to say, but I'm just saying in the context of the times produced. And if you look at, for example, they did a medal, but then the number of silver medals that they picked up, it shows you that, okay, it is not a case where they were completely, because remember we were talking about them not winning a gold medal, not necessarily them not medaling or not making a final. They had the most silver medals in track and field, and they were beaten by some pretty good performances. So for me, I just like to look at things in context, because then should the tables be reversed in Oregon I don't want it to be, it won't be a shock to say, oh my God, they're performing oh so much better. Not necessarily, because I guess underperforming is measured based on expectations. So if you had high expectations, then you would be disappointed. But for me, the only real surprise, quote unquote, might have been Jacobs in the 100 meters. I don't think anybody probably had him to win. But out
He
of the
didn't even
other
have
events,
himself to win.
exactly. But out of the other events where the US might have been expected to medal and didn't, it took some really good performances to win the gold medal. So I'm not sure if, for me, it feels like a disservice to the other athletes to say that they only won because the US underperformed. If you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Question for you though, Marsha. The theory, sorry.
Silvers though, Marsha. It doesn't seem like they count silvers.
Well, that's their problem. That's for them to deal with.
But just a question, Marsha. Do you think the lack of crowd in the stands, there's a underlying theory that some countries and their athletes, because they are raised on having tens of thousands of people in the stands, that when they don't have them, they don't get as, as
That
up
us,
as correct. Exactly. There is that theory going around now that maybe that's one of the things that happened, because a lot of the American males usually operate on bravado and the testosterone and the strut and the peacock, the Maurice Green days and that kind of thing. And I don't know if that is valid, but I know there's a school of thought going around that the lack of fans in the stands may have impacted them more than some other countries.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that being bandied about. And I think it would be an interesting study to have, but the athletes themselves would have to tell me
Correct,
that.
because that goes into the psychology of sports.
Exactly. Because not everybody, because there were some athletes who said, you know what, they didn't even notice it. When they got on the line, they're totally locked in. They're not checking for what's going on around them. So I would have to hear from them.
Yeah, the only thing in recent time I compare it to is the NBA players who wanted out of the bubble, and the ones who were able to kind of grit their teeth for the 3 months or whatever and do it. There were some teams that they had enough, they wanted out of Orlando as soon as they got there, So there's a bit of psychology as far as that's concerned.
I remember when the West Indies first went to England, one of the questions posed to Jason Holder was, how is it going to feel playing without fans? And Jason had to tell them, that when we play regional cricket, nobody's in the stand. So it doesn't feel that foreign for us. So maybe some of the other athletes thrived in an environment that we didn't have that stand pressure on them. Who knows? It could have gone either way.
My question to you quickly before we leave, y'all would know better than me. Will there be fans allowed in Oregon for the World Championships next year?
Tickets are selling, I can tell you that.
I believe
As
so.
it stands, yes.
Justin Boy, based on what we saw at the Hall of Fame ceremony in Canton, Ohio, I will have to say yes.
It's the US. It's the US. I believe. I'd be I don't want to say disappointed. I'd be shocked and surprised if there weren't no fans. It's the US. It's the US.
The reason I ask that, because I know full well things here, and I tell this to Marsha every day, are almost back to normal. So I don't know if it was the IOC who would have had control over allowing fans into Oregon or not. But if indeed that is up to the US officials, I can tell you that there will be fans, and there will be tons of them. So we can.
And remember the no fans in Japan was from the Japanese government and the Japanese organizing committee. And then the IOC would have followed their recommendation. So a similar thing would have to happen.
Because I think at one point, they were allowing Japanese spectators only.
Yes.
Yeah, they were allowing Japanese spectators only. Yeah, at one point. But then obviously, with the rise of COVID-19 cases, they said they couldn't go on with that.
Well, I can tell you we will have a very, very interesting World Championships next season, because the Americans will allow fans. But we are out of time, folks. I want to thank my esteemed thanks to Anmar. As I said, OIS reporter out of there in Japan. Our favorite guest, none other than sponsor Ricky Nurse. I don't have to thank Marsha. She's here every week. She's doing her job. I'm just joking, though. But thank you so very much for tuning in and watching. And, same bat time, same bat channel. So come back here next week, Monday, and hopefully we will have even larger panel of guests for the next episode of This Just In. So for Marsha Boyce, for Anmar Goodridge-Boyce, and for also Ricky Nurse, I am Just In of This Just In. So sorry, signing out and tell you good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See ya. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with me, ain't nobody here just the same. I still got the world. I still got the world. I still got the world. I still got the world.
I said, can I be a legend? Search your soul and answer me this question. Do you think I have what it takes to be great, but still be humble and learn from my mistakes?